The cab driver, it's a bit like being in a confessional. People will tell you things that they wouldn't otherwise tell other people. It's sort of like, it's just some stranger. I'm going to go out, I'll probably never see this person ever again. And they'll open up and tell you stuff. It was really useful once I'd sort of set off on this path of becoming a writer.
Hello and welcome to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. I'm Juliet Gilkes Romero, a stage and screenwriter. Today I'm delighted to have with me Ishy Din. Ishy is a playwright and screenwriter who I admire greatly. He's known for his narratives that reflect his upbringing on Teesside, where he remains rooted in Middlesbrough. Ishy's journey into the world of urban storytelling, if I can call it that, was preceded by a diverse array of jobs, marking the beginning of his evolution into a versatile and accomplished dramatist across multiple disciplines. Welcome, Ishy.
Thank you for having me, Juliet.
No problem at all. We'll be taking a deep dive into your creative journey. But first, it's April, which marks Shakespeare's birthday, his birthday and death, actually, on the 23rd of April. What, if any, has his influence been on you? And do you agree with the assertion that Shakespeare is one of the world's greatest playwrights?
Well, Shakespeare's influence has really permeated all forms of literature and storytelling. He's the most celebrated, so he's the most visual and most present. So you will always refer back to him and his plays because they feel like the ones that are the original story archetypes. So you will always refer to him in conversations, in when developing characters and ideas. So you'll think of Macbeth and Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet and all of these sort of peoples as the sort of the jumping off point. So he is incredibly prevalent in most dramatists' the thinking processes, I think. And the guy can tell a story, can't he?
Absolutely. And I think what's fascinating is that he never really travelled far and wide. So perhaps from London to Stratford-upon-Avon, which I think gives an idea as to how interior imagination is. But one thing that he was very good at, he kind of immersed his storytelling in characters who were dominated by ambition, jealousy, pride, violence, and sacrifice. You know, he presented life as it is, and I find a lot of that in your writing.
Yeah, well, you touched upon my upbringing and my various jobs and various sort of ways I tried to earn a living. I came across lots of people, and you soon realise that that there are certain universal truths about who we are as human beings, and if you can tap into those, then those ideas will travel across class, across race, across continents and geography, and people will understand. When I am doing workshops or talking to young people or trying to convey this idea of, universal human truths, I always sort of give this example of a mother in Mogadishu who has lost a child will know what a mother in Manhattan who has lost a child is going through. And if we as dramatists can tap into that, well, then that will then speak to everybody. And even if we don't know that world, we don't know those people, we'll understand that, profound human emotion. I try and tap into that and, start my characters off at that point and then just layer my own lived experience over the top of that. And it seems to have worked so far.
Yes, I mean, as I said, there are great parallels between what we do as dramatists now, how we define character.
Yeah.
And I will be elaborating or going further into how your working life as a Middlesbrough cab driver, we're going to touch on that, how that intersects with your craft and how you create characters. April also marks the anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination in 1968. And actually, he famously came to Newcastle to receive an honorary doctorate of civil law. One of his famous quotes was, Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter, which takes me to your play, Silence, about the story of partition. I still think that people don't know enough about partition. How does that whole concept of silence, how did that impact what you were trying to unravel with that play?
Well, it was very much part of that, and just to add that I wasn't the only writer on that. There was 4 of us who worked on that, 4 incredible writers that worked on that play, from Kavita Puri's incredible book as well. The silence part of it was how people were reluctant to talk about the crimes that had been committed, the devastation of that, the shame of what went on and who was involved and who was affected by it, and who did and didn't do things, and what could have been done and what couldn't have been done. And people were reluctant to talk about that, were reluctant to drag those horrible memories back to the fore of the mind. But it's really important that we excavate that time and excavate those memories and those emotions as dramatists, as ways of communicating to a newer audience who may not know what went on, that these things happened, that there was a cause and effect around these things, and they inform how we are today and who we are today and how we belong or don't belong.
Would you describe Silence as a retelling of the generational trauma of partition?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to archive this. We need to try and understand. It's really difficult if you weren't participating in it, but it's vitally important to highlight the fact that these massive traumas carry on through generation after generation after generation, and they're passed down through families and create these scars that are unseen but still very much exist. And I think, what's happening in the world currently is also something that we need to bear in mind, because we have evidence of this through what history tells us of what's gone past, and we see the effects of this. These things will last for generations and generations, and we should be incredibly aware of that.
And they say silence is complicity, and that's what's frightening about what's happening in the Middle East or Sudan, the Ukraine. But, we can't afford to be silent.
We can't, because if we want to change, if we want to work towards a better society, a better understanding of our fellow human beings, we need to excavate those traumas. We need to excavate, and we can't be silent about those things. We need to talk about those things, and we need to issue the warnings of history that tell us these things will come back.
This brings us to our first dive into the RLF's archive, which holds hundreds of recordings of writers talking about their creativity. We'll hear from Claudine Toutonji, an award-winning playwright and poet. This is Claudine talking about her play Slipping, which ran at the Stephen Joseph Theatre in 2014, following its selection for New York's Lark Place Centre's International Hot Ink series.
Strangers, Claudine Toutonji. The subtitle for this piece was going to be How Giving Away My Darling to Strangers Brought Her to Life. Then I thought again, as it sounded a bit alarming and possibly indicative of some kind of dodgy illegal adoption process, which you'll be relieved to know isn't on the agenda here. Instead, what I want to talk about is the process all playwrights go through when the play that you've been working on and hugging to yourself for many a moon finally leaves home and gets put on its feet in a rehearsal room by total strangers. This is nerve-wracking on a number of levels. Not only are people you've never met before going to be performing your work, but also a good few, ideally, are going to be seeing it. Unless the play totally tanks, which would be worse. Either way, by now, you really do have to get on board with the fact that all of the probably quite hair-raising stuff you've put into the play is actually going to be said out loud in public. even if the only way you've been able to write it is through a weird form of magical thinking in which you convince yourself there's absolutely nothing to worry about, no need to self-censor at all because no one's ever going to see or hear it. And then it gets on. Which I'm certainly not complaining about. Having a play on is wonderful and joyous and exciting. But in my case, it also led to me lying on the floor, hyperventilating, wondering if I could wear a fake moustache and beard when I actually went to see it. This was with my first play, Slipping, a two-hander about a relationship sparked in an ocular prosthetics clinic between Eleanor, a former teacher getting an artificial eye that she hasn't told anyone about, and Sean, her ocularist, who's hand-painting the eye. It was not, I hasten to add, autobiographical, but it was close to the bone, since I'd gone through the process of getting an artificial eye myself, somewhere around the time I started down the road to writing Slipping. A long road, as it turned out, with many stages. Which was, I realise now, no bad thing, as every time I gave an early draft an outing to scratch nights or short play festivals or beyond, the contact with a fresh director, a fresh production team and a fresh pair of Eleanor and Sean's meant the play grew. And so did I. At least I think I did. Possibly through a strange kind of incremental exposure therapy. Or maybe it was just that every encounter I had with someone new who hadn't been coerced or given any kind of cash incentive to say the play had struck a chord with them but still did, spurred me on. Now, I realise that might sound a bit, craven. And certainly I do aspire to be the more stoic kind of self-contained writer who doesn't need outside validation. I aspire to that, but I'm not there yet. Plus, what, after all, is writing stories but a cry in the dark, an attempt to knock on the door of AN other and hope they'll invite you in, laugh in all the right places and get a kick out of the tale you're telling? You can hope this happens, you can pray. But there are no guarantees. And my story, certainly when I started it, felt extremely niche. Eleanor, a woman coping with a disfigured eye, decides on life-changing surgery and goes into slight overdrive, if not compulsively lying, then certainly compulsively massaging the truth along the way to forestall others prejudging her based on her appearance. Sean, an expert in handcrafting fake eyes, is equally heavily invested in concealment strategies of his own. I knew I found these two interesting, but for a long time they were hazy in my mind, and I wasn't sure, or at least not completely sure, if they would speak to others too. Early on in Slipping's gestation, I tried my characters out at a Hampstead Theatre scratch night. The audience, none of whom were blood relations, I promise, filled in feedback forms and almost to a man said at the end, "Write more, please, we really want to know what happens to these two." This felt tremendous at the time and also terrifying because I knew I had to do it then. I had to write the play, but I had no idea how. Fast forward 6 years and really quite a lot of drafts later to the point where I knew the play was almost there but not quite, told you it was a long road, and I got lucky. Slipping got selected to be workshopped at New York's Lark Play Development Centre as part of an international reading series. I got flown over in a state of shock to work on developing my final draft with the phenomenal director Giovanna Sardelli, an ace cast, and enough per diems to buy quite a lot of maple syrup and pancakes. In Manhattan, thousands of miles away from home, Slipping finally came alive for me. It wasn't in a flash with a bang and with thunder. It was a process of many small moments in rehearsal. Like the moment one of the cast talked candidly about their sister's struggle with accepting she was to have a prosthetic eye. Or the moment my director described Eleanor as a total badass, which wasn't a term in my vocabulary at the time, but something just clicked for me when I heard it used of my protagonist. Or maybe it was just that New York gets disjointed lives, fractured expectations, and self-branding issues like no other city in the world. Either way, the incredible warmth and gusto the audience showed our staged reading pumped up a little fluffy cloud of hope for me on which I floated back across the pond, applied myself to submitting the play with renewed vigour, and got it on. It premiered at the Stephen Joseph Theatre to a fantastic response, great reviews, and a commission to adapt it for Radio 4. When we finally went to studio and I had the privilege of hearing my characters interpreted by Andrew Scott and Charlotte Riley, Eleanor and Sean no longer seemed in any way like hazy strangers, but like flesh and blood, complicated individuals who I really knew and by now loved.
We've just heard from Claudine. There's a line in her piece that I find really interesting. And she says, you really do have to get on board with the fact that all of the probable quite hair-raising stuff you've put into the play is actually going to be said out loud in public. I think you probably experienced this with your first play, Snookered, because there was quite a reaction. I remembered it seemed like, in a way, it's like, this cab driver from Middlesbrough, he's writing and he's intelligent and he's creative. And it was almost as if people were surprised. But, you of all people, as a cab driver, you're listening to people. You're hearing humanity. My father drove a cab in the 1970s to make extra money, nights. The slice of life that he witnessed and experienced, he was asked to be a getaway driver, Russell Sheep. He had to stop. It was quite wild. I am certain that in all the conversations that you had as a cab driver, this is what really spurred you on to be able to tell story. Is that true?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think on one particularly quiet night, I did a little formula where I worked out that I'd had something like 160,000 random conversations with people. And a cab driver, it's a bit like being in a confessional. People will tell you things that they wouldn't otherwise tell other people. It's sort of like, it's just some stranger. I'm going to get out. I'll probably never see this person ever again. And they'll open up and tell you stuff. It was really useful. Once I'd sort of set off on this path of becoming a writer, I used to have my little notepad with me, and I'd write little lines of dialogue or little ideas that came up. But it was a weird transition as well. So I sort of went from cab driver to cab driver who writes to writer who drives a cab to writer. So I had this bit in the middle, the second act, so to speak, of my journey where, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew I wanted to pursue this as a sort of career, and I'd have my notebook with me, and the number of ideas, lines of dialogue, characters that came directly from people who I'd met on the cabs or who had had conversations with. The loads of stuff came from that. And I sort of miss it in many ways because, we all know being a writer is such a isolated pastime. And I miss that contact with humanity. I mean, with all its flaws and with all its goodness and badness and everything that comes with that. I miss that. I miss being able to just converse with people that live very different lives to what I live and have very different circumstances to mine. I find that enriching, not just as a writer, I find it enriching as a human being. So I think that's really important, and I really do miss it. Although I don't know how much I'd enjoy being back on the road now, but maybe, who knows?
Be very different.
It would. It would. The brazenness of certain people to say things that, post-Brexit, it'd be really interesting to hear what people are saying about what their view of the world is now, and how brazenly some people can say things that they would never have said. And I was quite lucky. I wasn't a slight fellow, and I have a broad Middlesbrough accent, as you can tell. And one of the strategies I used to particularly use was speak straight away. As soon as somebody gets in, speak in a broad Middlesbrough accent. Hiya, how are you? Where are you going? Where do you want to be and stuff? Which would automatically sort of break the ice a bit, where they'd think, he's a Middlesbrough lad, this, as opposed to somebody else. And I used to really feel for the guys who perhaps spoke with a bit of an accent, were slight in their build and stuff like that, because bullies look for that. And because you're picking up like a cross-section of society, you will pick those people up as well who are looking for those vulnerabilities, who are looking for a point of attack. So, I don't envy them sometimes.
I think that's why I've always found you really interesting, because having worked in the Northeast, myself as a journalist, when you come across communities with heritage from outside of this country, but when you hear them speaking in a vernacular, if you didn't see them, if you just heard them on a telephone, you'd imagine a completely different personality. But it does speak to your identity. How did this experience this life experience lead you to write the play Snookered?
One thing that I give a lot of credit to is naivety and an ignorance of what theatre was supposed to be, how a play was supposed to be structured and what characters were supposed to be. It was all very instinctive. So I just wrote what I thought was going to be a good story. I figured it out. I went through this process, this journey of sort of coming up with this story of four friends and what happens and getting, this night in this pub, and just told that story and just made them speak like I would speak with my friends and use that really profane language that we would use when we were out playing pool and stuff like this. And there was this moment where I was in London for a Tamasha writer's residency. Right at the beginning, this was before Snookered, and I was given two plays. I was given Black Watch by Gregory Burke, and I was given Christmas by Simon Stevens. Somebody said, you should read these. And when I read them, it was such an eye-opening moment, because it was like, I can use this language. I can speak how these characters would speak. I don't have to invent a language for them. I can just be honest with how we speak with each other. That was an enlightening moment for me. And after that, I wouldn't use the phrase plain sailing, but one of my anxieties was sort of settled. And I thought, all right, just let them talk how you hear them talk in your imagination, how you feel your friends talk, how we would converse if we were in a pub playing pool, and then just let rip.
I think August Wilson was very good at this, using the vernacular with character. And I know that reviewers, they said that you had a very fine ear for the absurdities and obscenities of the human condition. I know that some people walked out of Snookered in some productions, and I think it's because you were able to take such a deep dive into reality that I think sometimes when people go to the theatre, they're expecting something else. I think theatre's changed a lot since 2012. I would say that your writing then was very much what we called in your face theatre, but you were in great company. I mean, people walked out of Sarah Kane, Martin McDonough, Mark Ravenhill, and you were all writers who found your voice and used it really well, but with a lot of acumen.
Yeah. And again, I think I put this down to a certain naivety. For a working class lad from Middlesbrough, a cab driver, somebody who has a sort of Pakistani heritage, just the idea of being able to operate in this world of theatre and plays and actors and directors and all of this was so fantastical that if I had known the rules, if I had known perhaps Snookered would never have been written the way Snookered was written. It was just, I'm just going to tell this story of what it's like, not really understanding that there was a certain, constituency of theatre that we're not expecting anything like that. But I wasn't to know. I was just like, oh, of course, I'm just going to tell this story of four friends. And I think that really helped. I think sometimes we become overburdened with the rules and the regulations of what we're trying to do. And it hinders us, particularly early on. It sort of hinders us in being able to express ourselves truthfully. And it's really important that you do learn and you understand structure and you understand, how your piece is going to unfold. But having that sort of naivety of what the rules and regulations of being a playwright were really helped me in those early days.
This brings us beautifully to my interest in your craft and how you write. And I know that you also you teach. Is this something that you try to guide new writers, trying to find their voice? Is this how you guide them so that they're not overburdened by all these books on playwriting and structure?
Definitely. I talk when I'm teaching or, leading workshops, I talk a lot in metaphors and in analogies and stuff like this. I just sort of think sometimes we overcomplicate the ideas, and they're quite simple ideas, and they're quite simple. There's simple ways to understand what it is that we're trying to do. One of the ones I sort of give is being a cabinet maker, that we might know what these beautiful cabinets are going to look like, and we might know how we're going to design it, and where the drawers are going to be, and what the handles are going to look like, and what shape it's going to be, and all of this. But we do need to know how to measure, and we do need to know how to cut, and we do need to know how to do a dovetail joint or a mortise joint, and all of these things in order to make it, realise it to its fullest potential. So it's great coming up with the idea, but it's important that we do that. And craft is one of those things that you can learn just by repetition and doing it again and again. You will get better. You get better at it all the time. So that's how I sort of try and express to newer writers that, think of it like that. Don't think of it as a burden. Learn how to do these sort of things and learn the big moments in your story where you're going to twist it a bit and send it off in other directions. I love Mountaintop by Kotori Hall, and I always use that as an example of the big moments, these big moments in this piece of beautiful work that we suddenly get this new bit of information and it sends us off in this other direction. Then we get another big piece of information. It sends us off in a different direction. So as you're thinking of your story, think about where am I going to place these big bombs that are going to go off. They'll just suddenly send my play off in a different direction. And we think, oh, it wasn't that. It's this, isn't it? We didn't realise that. Now what happened at the beginning makes sense, doesn't it? And I draw a lot. I use lots of flip charts and use imagery to sort of, explain what it is that newer writers need to consider of how to just get that shape of it. So we're constantly travelling and we can't predict where it's going to go or what's going to happen next.
Does that come naturally to you?
I think so. I think anybody who can tell a good joke has the ability to be a writer, because there's a rhythm to it, and we realise that we need to set something up, we need to explain it a bit, and then we need to pay it off. I think if you can do that, then it is quite instinctive. There's a great book by John York called Into the Woods, where he posits this idea that actually structure, we're hardwired with structure. Even if you're talking to a child and they're going to tell you a story, they'll start with once upon a time, and they'll tell the story from the beginning, and they'll have a middle and they'll have an end. And actually, as human beings, we're hardwired with structure, and how we communicate with people. We communicate people with structure, and it's just about, tapping into that and honing it and developing structure and stuff like this. So I think it does come instinctively.
I feel as if it's second nature to you, because I think you're a very good listener. And I think also, when you were driving your cab, you listened. You were listening to people being confessional and telling you stories all the time. And if you didn't have that gift, that talent, because not everybody listens, you might not have been able to, to have written that first play. Or it's about taking an interest in people as well. But I think you've got that, deeply within, because I don't sense that structure is a battle for you, because I think you understand what storytelling is.
I've always been interested in people, and I enjoy the company of people. I used to have a friend. Well, I say I used to. He's still a really close friend of mine. And after our shift, we'd chat about how the night had gone. And he used to have, generally, he'd say, well, I picked these people up and they were terrible, and I picked these people up and they were terrible, and this happened, and that fair was awful, and this fair was awful. And he said, well, I've generally had a good night. People have been pretty decent. There was a couple of times I felt like, I'm a bit naff, these people. And I come to the realisation that my friend used to pick somebody up and automatically presume that these were bad people until they proved to him otherwise. Whereas I would automatically presume these are good people until they prove to me otherwise. I used to have such a better night than he used to have, because I used to think, well, they're just people. They just want to talk. And he had this presumption that, well, these people are going to get in and that they've got a another motive, or they're not going to be very nice. And it just creates something. One of the things about those 160,000 conversations were, some of them were silent. There was nothing said. Somebody got in and said, could you take me to the train station? But there was something being in that space that we communicated.
That's the element of drama, isn't it?
There is. We communicated something, the way they were sat, their expressions, their body language, what they were exuding. You pick up on these things, especially in a sort of 4-foot square metal box. You pick up on these sort of things, and that really sort of helps as well. Yeah,
and that's what a writer has to do, don't they?
Absolutely. We're chroniclers of the human condition.
This also brings us nicely to an excerpt from the writer Anna Woodford. So let's have a listen to Anna.
Writing with women in the library of Low Newton Prison. Running through the fountains at Annick Garden early one morning before the gates were officially open to the public. Doing a poetry reading at the New School, New York. Riding a fire appliance en route to a 999 call, while partygoers in Newcastle waved from the pavements and, in some cases, pulled up their tops. Taking part in residencies, commissions, teaching, etc. has given me treasured moments like these. Writing is a solitary activity, but being a writer opens you up to the world, to many worlds. As poet in residence at Tyne Weir Fire and Rescue Service, I was given a bib with the word observer on it, lest someone mistake me for a genuine member of the emergency services. I feel I am wearing that bib a lot of the time anyway as a poet, and people are generally kind enough to let me rubberneck. At 16, I sat on a stationary luggage trolley at York train station, waiting for my connection to Hebden Bridge. I'd won a writing competition in the local paper, and my prize was a starting to write course at the Arvon Centre in Lumbank. I was part terrified, part elated. It struck me suddenly how weird it was that writing in the privacy of my bedroom had led to this visceral, physical experience, the cold luggage trolley beneath me, the butterflies. It was the first time I felt the disparity between the desk world and the public world it can lead to. It strikes me now how weird it is that as a writer I have the opportunity to remember that moment and to tell you about it. All writers need time and space, and they are lucky if they have a life that affords it. But for me, writing in solitude is only half of the equation. I need to get out there, otherwise I risk arranging and rearranging my paperclips and writing poems about paperclips. I was back in York a couple of years ago to see my poems trundle past on buses. I was taking part in a project that gave me many such treasured moments working with older people with mobility issues. Visiting a care home one day as part of the brief, I overheard a harassed member of staff say to her colleague, sotto voce, "What am I supposed to do with the poet?" It's a question I ask myself a lot of the time. What am I supposed to do with myself as a poet? On that day, the answer was to read poems aloud to Pat in her bedroom while she knitted, and to spend time with Edna, who used to work in the British Library and was in the early stages of dementia. I was granted a brief, privileged window into their lives. The solitude of writing makes me treasure these moments all the more. I return to my desk energised and deeply appreciative.
So that was Anna Woodford. So, Ishy, at school, was there any indication that you had creative talent?
I was in the school plays. Not very many. I think I was the only kid with an Asian heritage that was interested in it, you know. That might have been a little indicator. Although part of me was that, you got out of classes. So it might have been that. We came from an incredibly sort of cultured house, relatively speaking, to that. it wasn't highbrow culture. We didn't have the complete works of Shakespeare. We had the bumper edition of the radio and TV Times, and we'd sit and circle everything at Christmas time that, oh, we're going to watch A Wizard of Oz again. But that means we can't watch that because BBC One and BBC Two clash. So we're then going to go onto the two Ronnies, and we'd sit and we'd watch that. We were big into music. My dad had a reel player with classic Mohammed Rafi and Lata Mangeshkar Bollywood songs, so there was always music in the house. My sister was a prolific reader, again, not highbrow stuff, but lots of books and magazines and all of this. I think that really helped, that I was interested and I enjoyed these sort of things. But yeah, I was a brown, northern working class lad, and just that idea that somebody like me, I didn't have any role models, somebody like me with my background was allowed to write. You know, it didn't happen. I didn't know anybody who wrote. I didn't know anybody who'd gone on to be a playwright or a writer. So the very notion of it was beyond anything that I could imagine. And it was only later in life that I'd gone through this journey of being a businessman, and a terrible businessman, and working in retail and working in the construction industry and being a cab driver and doing all of these things. I just landed on this by pure serendipity. I heard this advert. I just bought this computer, and it was this idea of like, oh, well, I'll do this, to just use the computer rather than any aspiration. If that first thing that I'd sent off had been rejected, it would just have confirmed everything, all my prejudices and everything that I thought, well, people from my background and class don't become writers. This is what those people over there do, and we're meant to, work and struggle and or whatever that fate holds for you.
So we're coming towards the end of our time together. Before we finish, I'm really interested to know what has kept you going as a writer.
Well, firstly, I think I feel blessed, and it's an incredible privilege what I do, and I should understand what a privilege it is. Because if we think about it, what we're sort of saying is, that I have something really important to tell you. So spend some money, sit down there, be quiet, let me tell you something. There's something quite narcissistic about that in many ways, which, being a writer, we oscillate between these 2 points, don't we, of thinking we're sort of geniuses and thinking we're complete and utter fakes, and we sort of oscillate between these two. But in moments of reflection, I think this is an incredible privilege. This is an incredible privilege to be allowed to do something like this. It was interesting at the beginning. I was this, northerner, and I had Play On, and it was getting these incredible reviews, and it got me an agent, and it got me a publisher, and it got all these fantastic things, and people were being very complimentary about me and my work. And I thought, right, this is it. There's no looking back now. This next stop is a BAFTA and a Olivier and an Oscar and all of these garnering all these big awards and all of these sort of things. Of course, it doesn't transpire like that. I think what's really helped sustain me is a hustle that I had, that I keep to this day. I spent the early part of my life sort of ducking and diving, not really satisfied with what I was doing with my life, whether that, like I was saying, working in retail or driving cabs or selling double glazing, the world's worst double glazing salesman. But, these things weren't satisfying. And before Snookered, it had been my longest stint as a cab driver. And I was thinking, is this it? Is this going to be the rest of my life? So when writing came along, I grabbed it with both hands and I thought, right, I'm not letting go. It helped. I wasn't really qualified to do anything else because it is such a difficult pursuit, such a difficult pursuit. And there's been many moments where I've thought, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And it's such a struggle. So like having that lack of options has helped. Being ambitious, not being satisfied, thinking, well, this is not enough. I'm not very satisfied. I still want more. I still want my great play to be on. I still want my TV series. I still want my great movie. I still want my sitcom. I want to do all of these things, and I won't be satisfied till I do them. I think as I get older, I realise even when you do them, you're not really going to be satisfied. There's an interesting conversation about class in that. Figuring out, well, how do I survive? How do I survive as a playwright and a screenwriter? And how do I do this? And having other strings to my bow. When I used to go to workshops as a participant, I always used to think, wouldn't it be fantastic if I was stood at the top telling people like me about what it's like, about structure and all those things. So I used to manifest these things. I used to think one day, that's what I'd love to do. And those things transpire.
So how important is resilience? Because I know that you're writing about Muhammad Ali. Have you found parallels in terms of looking at his life and looking at, your life and what you're trying to achieve?
Well, we share a birthday, which is, good, which is nice. He is my hero in many ways. One of the things that I came across that has really inspired me was that Muhammad Ali famously said, you don't get beat when you get knocked down. You get beat when you fail to stand up again. I've sort of adopted that. I obstinately refused to give in. I've committed so much of my life to it. I sort of think, well, just keep going. And it's difficult at times to dig into those reserves, to go back again at it and sort of think, well, I'm going to give it another go, or I'm going to put another idea forward for development, or I'm going to try and get some more people interested in this movie idea and stuff like that. But it's what I want to do. It's what I love with a passion. And again, what an incredible privilege it is.
That is really beautiful and quite emotionally affecting, actually, from one writer to another. Thank you. And now here's Anne Morgan with the latest RLF news.
Edson Burton has won the prestigious Tinniswood Award for the Best Original Audio Drama Script broadcast in 2024. Announced at the BBC Audio Awards on the 30th of March, the accolade recognises Burton's BBC Radio 4 play Man Friday, a reimagining of Daniel Defoe's classic novel Robinson Crusoe. It comes with a £3,000 prize donated by the Society of Authors. Man Friday is available on BBC Sounds. Numerous titles by Royal Literary Fund Fellows have hit the shelves in the past month. They include Sue Rowe's Hidden Portraits, the untold stories of 6 women who loved Picasso, which has been published by Faber, and Kapka Kasabova's Anima, a Wild Pastoral, which tells the story of the author's time with the last moving pastoralists in Europe and has been published in paperback by Penguin. Meanwhile, Ren James's duology of novellas for reluctant teen readers, The Starlight Watchmaker and The Deep Sea Duke, is being published in the US by Union Square. John Donnelly's new play Apex Predator has opened at Hampstead Theatre in London. Directed by Blanche McIntyre, this exploration of how the hunter becomes the hunted in a domestic setting has been described as at once a sophisticated critique of the way we live now and a supernatural thriller. The production runs until the 26th of April. Visit hampsteadtheatre.com for tickets. And finally, Nicola Baldwin's new radio play We the Young Strong has aired on BBC Radio 4. Inspired by archived testimony of young Defence Regulation 18B detainees during World War II, it explores a 1930s Britain riven by economic and political marginalisation, austerity, radicalisation, protest and fake news. Directed by Celia de Wolf, We the Young Strong is available on BBC Sounds. And now, back to the studio.
I'd like to bring our session to a close, Ishy. It's been fantastic speaking to you today. Yes, I have a provocation before you go. According to Albert Camus, the purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself. Do you feel that this sentiment has resonated in any of your work?
That's a bit of a burden, isn't it? We try. We should have lofty ambitions. Whether they materialise or not is a moot point, but we should set off on our journey to sort of say, let me tell you something about who we are as human beings. Maybe you look at the world slightly differently after experiencing what I'm trying to tell you or I'm going to tell you. And if even one person is affected, you've done your little bit, haven't you?
You've been listening to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. If you'd like to share any comments or questions, please use the hashtag RLFCollected on our social media channels. The music was composed by Andy Glenn. There was research by Nicola Baldwin and post-production by James Robertson. Our producer was Anne Morgan.